Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be attempting to tackle the much requested how to make glitchy IDM drums like Aphex Twins. So, I'm going to be giving away the project file and samples from this video in the description for free, so make sure to check that out, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it'll be available without a download gate. And yeah, let's get started. So, this is the loop you heard in the intro. As you can see, it's pretty simple. It's just 4 layers actually, and then a bit of group processing, but I'm going to be breaking it down for you. The first sound we have here is this kick, which sounds like this. So the way that I made this kick is actually pretty simple. What it is, it's a 707 kick, so that's the original kick. And then you're hearing it dry here, but then it's going through the group processing. That's why it sounds a little bit different in the actual track. But yeah, so this is kind of like the first point I want to make, which is using drum machine sounds. So I think a lot of times with these kind of sounds like Aphex Twin and just like, I mean really like a lot of kind of more different stuff like this in general, people are always thinking like it's all these different kind of crazy drum samples, and it's like, you know, you got to synthesize the drums yourself and you got to do all kinds of like modular synthesis sounds. And it's really not like that. Like if you listen to a lot of Aphex Twins tracks, for example, the one that really influenced this video was T69 Collapse. You can hear he uses a lot of like 808s, 606s, 707s, 909s. Like it's literally just those same old basic kind of like drum machine sounds that everybody knows and loves. And then what you do with it is kind of what makes it like more interesting and gives it like more context. Like it's almost like more interesting to me to use the drum machine sounds because you kind of like you're very familiar with them. Like if you're somebody who's into electronic music and you hear this, you recognize that kick pretty much right off the bat. Like it's a very popular sample. But then when you start hearing all this weird glitching going on, like for example what I've done with the snare, where the sample's like kind of shortening like that, it just kind of takes it to like a new thing. And like I said, you're getting all that context of all the other times you've heard these types of samples, but it's not like, it's still like something new and kind of fresh with it, if that makes any sense. So with this one, like I said, it's completely dry in here, and it's really more about the programming. You can see I've got this kind of pattern here. It's not really much of a pattern. It's more of just kind of like a collection of notes, I guess you would say. But you can see what I'm doing is I'm doing all the glitches inside of the notes. So that's another thing is like you don't need to use like beat repeat or like live cut or any other kind of like VST or effect that could possibly make it glitch out. Really, a lot of times it just comes down to the programming. Like I actually believe that a lot of times Aphex Twin is just sitting there and meticulously programming all the glitches that you hear in his tracks. And yeah, so that's basically what I've done here. You can see like I've got this pattern where it's not really the same thing twice, and I've got like kind of some things in here as well. Like you can see these 30-second notes. I believe that's what they would be. But like stuff like that just makes it a little bit more kind of glitchy sounding, because you can have the sort of like random pattern and all, but yeah, those little things in there, and really any of these parts where it's doing like multiple notes very rapidly like that, I feel like really helps with the glitchiness, especially in this part where you can see where it kind of feels like it's going out of time. So that's really it for the kick. Again, it's pretty simple. Like you'll see as I go through this, it's not that complicated. But then for the next thing we've got here, we have the snare, and the snare sounds like this. So the way I made the snare pattern was very similar to the way I made the kick. I've just kind of done all the glitches within the MIDI here. And then, yeah, so the way I wrote this one was I kind of wrote like a basic, like straightforward snare pattern, like basically having the snare on the 2 and the 4, so it would be like, you know, it would be kind of like doom, doom, like that kind of beat. And I took that and then I just kind of glitched it out from there. So what this technique kind of does is it gives you like a strong framework. Like you can see I kept in most of these hits that were just on the 2 there. And yeah, like it just gives you something to start with. Like this is basically how I did this. Like I said, I just wrote that in, and then I drew in the kick, and then that was when I came in and I started adding like the extra glitches. So what this all goes to say is if you're trying to write these type of patterns, and it can seem a bit daunting because they're just very like random and sort of like odd sounding, I guess is the best way I could put it. Yeah, try starting with something really straightforward and then just add a lot of extra notes in there. And you can see with this one, I've done the little like fast notes as well. Here, it's really important, I feel like, because the snare is where a lot of these kind of like like those little kind of things happen. So yeah, and then the other thing that's going on here is you can see I've also automated the decay as well as the sustain. So if I put these on two separate automation lanes, you can see, yeah, I've got the automation of the decay and the sustain doing pretty similar things. I've just kind of automated them both to go along with each other, I guess. But you can hear this in here. You can hear when the sample is kind of getting shorter. This is another thing that Aphex Twin does a lot, and a lot of IDM producers do this. It's not just him. But yeah, this is a really cool technique because what it does is it kind of helps to bring your sounds to life. Is like when you have like a really organic sound, right? Like say you have, like just a regular drum, for example. Like you're not just hearing like that sound, like one sample of it. When you have like a drum, for example, you hit it and it never sounds the same twice. You always have like different things happening and it's always changing. And so having stuff like this, like I said, is like a way to do that with samples. Because with samples, you can't have it always changing. You can't have it, sounding different every time you hit it. It doesn't really work the same way that like a live drum does. But you do have stuff like this, like the envelope of the sound and all that kind of stuff that you can automate and get a pretty lively sound out of it. Like I said, I mean, this doesn't sound like a realistic snare by any means. That wasn't necessarily the comparison I was making, but I meant more just like, again, for those organic kind of things that you get when you're like playing an instrument or when you're even just like, tuning a drum or something like that. It just gives you something to kind of work with, basically, if that makes any sense. Like some parameters that you can play around with that help to bring it to life. And again, even though it's not the most organic sound, it does make it more interesting. And of course, since this is super glitchy IDM, we're really not going for the most organic sound. So the next sound I have here is this rim shot, which sounds like this. So this is just actually playing at the end of every 2 bars. You can hear. It kind of comes in there. It's like on those 16th notes there. And this is the one thing that's actually playing like a pretty regular pattern. It's just playing the same thing each time. And yeah, this is kind of more like some punctuation. Like it just kind of says at the end of those 2 bars, like, okay, we're about to go into another part. If I turn it off, you can hear like in some of those spots, like toward the end there, where it gets kind of glitchy and the pattern starts to go in more and more off of the beat. Yeah, having something like this really helps to kind of bring it back for the start of every 2 bars or so. And so again, that's pretty simple. Really not a whole lot to say there. But the next thing that I have here is this operator hi-hat, which sounds like this. So the way that I made this sound was using operator, like I said. What we have here is I've got some white noise, and then that's going into this bandpass filter. And so the bandpass filter is what kind of shapes it and makes it sound like more of a hi-hat. If I turn this off, you can hear that's just what it sounds like just coming out of that oscillator. And then when we add the bandpass, it leaves us with kind of like a hi-hat type of sound. And so I'll show you the MIDI on this one as well. You can see this one is very frantic, just like the kick and the snare. Like I kind of just drew this in based off of what sounded good. The way I wrote this was I had the kick and the snare, and then I added the rim shot, and then I added the hi-hat last. So this was when I really had like room to just play around, and I didn't have to like put stuff in just to get like an idea for the beat. I was already kind of working off of the vibe, if that makes any sense. So that's what you're seeing here. It's kind of random, but I think it fits really well with the rest of the stuff. Like, and this is the best way I could put it too. Is like when you're writing these type of patterns, you want to write it so it sounds kind of random, but everything still works together. Like that's really the difference, I feel like, between a lot of like sort of tracks we would call like good IDM glitchy type of music and then stuff we would just call like a random mess of sounds. It's because it's random things happening and it's like kind of chaos, but it's like organized chaos, if that makes any sense. And I wouldn't even necessarily describe it as chaos. I mean, sometimes it can be chaos, but yeah, it's just like a lot of like things happening. Again, seemingly randomly, but it's all working together for an overarching goal, so to speak. So then, the only effect that I have on there is this flanger. And the flanger is set like this, so I've just got it set here. I've got the delay time like that, and I've got a lot of feedback. You can hear that going on. And yeah, then to modulate it, I have this envelope. So I didn't want to use the LFO because it would just sound kind of like, I don't know, it's just kind of obvious because it's just moving slowly throughout the track. So I use this envelope to modulate it, and you can hear it sounds pretty cool. Because you can hear the flanger moving more and more based on how short each of these notes are. And that goes to my next point. So the last thing that I want to show you with this is this automation of the decay of the white noise. So this is very similar to what I was doing with the snare, where I was making it kind of shorter, and I was saying that's a way to kind of bring your sounds to life because it takes it from just like a one-shot sample to kind of something more organic and more lively. And yeah, you can hear that very much here. Like you can hear there are some parts where it's really short and it's almost like just like a little click, and there's some parts where it's really long. And yeah, it just makes this feel really alive and really helps to give it something interesting and make it more than just like a flat hi-hat that's just kind of randomly playing in there. And again, like I was saying, like the tracks that influence this, like T69 Collapse, like stuff like that, he's doing this throughout the track. Like having stuff like this moving is, yeah, really important for this stuff. So then on the group, I've got a bit of processing as well. So I'll show you what this whole thing sounds like with none of this. Here's what it sounds like completely dry. So yeah, you can hear definitely not quite as nice. So the first thing I've got on here is this drum bus, which is set like this. You can see I've got the transients down a little bit. I've turned the boom up a little bit to give it kind of like some more low end, especially with the kick. Then I've got the crunch going, and then I've got a bit of drive as well. So this sounds like this. So you can hear what that's doing is it's just beefing the whole thing up. Like it's taking it and kind of putting it all under this one umbrella of a bit of saturation and like this boom and even the transient shaper on there. And yeah, just really helping to like glue it all together. Again, here's without it. And then with it. And obviously, you know, it's doing quite a bit of a volume boost. But aside from that, I really think that this helps to glue all these together. And again, when you put everything under the same umbrella processing of like some saturation or any kind of like color and effect like that, you're going to inevitably make it all sound a lot more like tied together and a lot more like one beat as opposed to just a lot of different samples. So the next sound that the next effect that I have on here is this EQ8, which is just boosting a bit of high end. For whatever reason, I've noticed that drum bus, like when you use the distortion especially, and I think this is just a property of using distortion, it can kind of cut out that like really bright high end, so I just boosted it. Pretty simple stuff, it's kind of just in there. And yeah, and then the last thing that I have on here is this audio effect rack. And so inside of this audio effect rack, I actually only have one effect. I have the saturator. But what I've got going on here is I've routed the drive and the output to a macro. So the reason why I've done this is because what I wanted to do with this track was basically have the saturator automating throughout, because you'll listen to it and see what happens. It's kind of similar to what I was saying before when you like automate like the length of a sample, for example. When you have something like this, like an effect that's automating throughout the track, what you get is it really makes it feel like that much more alive and that much more interesting because it's constantly changing. It's not just staying the same. It doesn't just sound the same the whole way through. It's kind of like evolving and changing. And this is like another thing that I think if you listen to Aphex Twin stuff, like he does really well is have his sounds like really evolve and change throughout the track. And so that's the purpose of this. And then the reason why I put this in the audio effect track is because if you automate the saturator, basically what I wanted to do was just automate the drive on the saturator. But if you do that, I'll show you. It gets really, really loud, really fast. So what I did to combat this was I used an audio effect track, and I used the mapping. So inside of this mapping thing here, you can essentially like control how much one macro affects a certain knob. So in this case, what I've done is I mapped this so that as I turn the drive up, I turn the volume down with this output over here on this macro. So you can see when it's automating and this drive is going up, the output is going down. And so this allows me to automate the drive without it getting too crazy with the volume. And yeah, it's just kind of one of those things. It's like one of those things where you would think there would be, I guess, a more like automatic way to do this. But it's not really. Like you kind of just have to manually go in and map it like that so that you can use the effect and still automate it without too many problems. So that's pretty much it for this one. I got a bunch of requests for this tutorial, and I wanted to bring it to you guys. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. So that's from here for today, guys. Make sure you know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video, as well as subscribe. Once again, you can get the project file and samples from this video for free in the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it'll be available. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.